Now this is the Epson WP-4540 sitting here on the left. Now this is my existing printer that I use all of the time and the previous model to the one that we're reviewing today. Now of course I also have an Epson WorkForce 840 sitting here on the right, but I'll tell you that I'm currently using this printer here almost all of the time. But we can look at its comparison between how this one has gone, being a similar prior year model to the one that we're reviewing today, and how it's worked compared to another Epson that I have as well. I really like this printer. Now it is my primary printer that I used all of the time. I used it because it was most economical with the XL sized ink cartridges that we had. But it isn't without its problems. There are some that I'll talk about, but you can see its similarities and where the history from the current model we're reviewing in comparison to this. You'll see that the controls are similar but yet different. Just to give you a brief picture, you have the LCD panel that we see here. This is different on the new model compared to the old model. Notice this one, I actually kind of like this, and I could pull it out just a little bit because then it didn't stick out as far into my room because I have a rather small room that this is sticking in. I kind of liked that, and it would be just enough to keep paper not from falling off of it. Whereas you know in the other model you were forced to flip it all the way out because of the way it is. I think that's fine. One of the things I used all of the time on this was the USB port. I was constantly scanning things to it. Give you a preview of how the panel, the LCD looks like here. So you always had to change this one to PDF. It always defaulted to JPEG. Moving on. Oops, let's see, there we go. Again, this one always defaulted to 300, but I'm constantly having to pick that, changing the contrast, but it really wasn't a problem at all. I always found it a rather good breeze, and then you just picked color or black and white for when you wanted to use. But I always chose to scan to USB rather than having it do the Wi-Fi. For whatever reason, this model let you gave you more choices when you went to here. But the beauty of this one was, at least for my Windows PC, you could access this as a remote drive. So I wouldn't even take the thing out of the printer. It just stays in here most of the time, and I just go access it as a drive rather than taking this out of the computer and copying it over. And overall, it was faster for me that way. But overall, you'll see it looks very similar to the other model that we're reviewing today. And the history is something you're going to want to be aware of about this model here. Now, this model had a classic yellow ink streak problem. I had that problem happen to me. It just starts leaking internally, and it leaks a single straight line of yellow ink down the center of the page and doesn't put yellow ink anywhere else on the page, so the colors are all off. From yellow, and then eventually the yellow just dries up and runs out, and so then it stops leaking yellow, and you get, if you replace the yellow ink cartridge, it's a problem all over again. So I ended up just saying fine, let the color end, and then once it ran out, I used it as a black and white printer, and I really liked it because the scanning is great on this printer that I had here. So I was so happy with the printer that even when it stopped working with the color, but it was a bummer that the color broke down on the previous model generation that we have here. Hopefully that they fixed that, but remember when I had that problem, I actually called Epson, and Epson replaced the whole unit for me free of charge out of warranty. The warranty had expired on it, and they still sent me a brand new unit with all new ink cartridges inside. So they were really good at covering for the problem that was clearly a defect in the printer when I had that. So I just wanted you to be aware of the history that comes from this model when we're talking about the model that we're talking about today. But hopefully they've refined that. But again, Epson really stood behind this printer when I did have a problem with it. But even today, honestly, I'm still getting some banding, not leaking or anything like that. When the color prints, I use this the most, but I still get sometimes it just doesn't look like it prints, and it's as if it needs a head cleaning. Whereas this printer, I print to very infrequently, just once a month to keep it primed and going. It never has a problem. So the WorkForce 840 has been a dream for me, but this is my go-to printer as it's faster and more economical. I used to swear by my monochrome laser, the Canon model that I have here. It was so fast and such crisp text and so economical to use that I absolutely loved it. However, I have switched for a few years now to use the other Epson model that I've had because it's so economical to use with color for that one as well, especially with the XL ink cartridges. And having color for printing maps is just priceless from that perspective. So once I've switched, I haven't really used this one since.